We are all going to die. She read those words on the screen of her laptop again and again and felt them deep inside. Yes, they were. Whoever had written them was right. She swallowed hard and felt her hand shaking as she scrolled back up to the top of the post. Someone has to do something, people were screaming into the void of the internet. And yet, the only people who seemed willing to answer were those still trying to make a profit of the catastrophe. It had started somewhere in Europe, as far as Isabella could find out. A single person there, just walking down the street, had suddenly been attacked, beaten, then dragged away by what looked ostensibly like his twin. The man had no family, no brothers or sisters, but that story didn't even go viral. Because before it could, true chaos broke out. By now, every person on this planet had their own twin. Isabella had seen it. Videos of people getting attacked, then dragged away. To where, she didn't know. Why wasn't known either. There were thousands of theories still floating on the web. Some people claimed the doppelgangers were aliens abducting folk. Others said they were demons dragging their victims to hell. What was known, at least as far as Isabella could tell, was that everyone had their own doppelganger now. And once they caught you, you'd never appear again. Someone knocked on the door to her apartment, but she didn't look up from the screen. It wasn't important. What bothered her the most was people still lying about this shit on the internet. Some were claiming that they had been taken and had come back. It was all lies. Was that the work of some doppelganger? Or was it just the usual shitty human behavior? Someone wanting to see if people would be dumb enough to fall for their lies, to make themselves feel superior. Maybe humanity should die, she thought. Heard the second knock on her door and then shook her head. People had tried many things to get rid of their own doppelganger. Some had taken it into their own hands, shooting them point blank, only to find out that those things didn't die quite so easily. It might take them a few minutes, but those monsters would be up on their feet, coming after the original again, just like before. Others had tried negotiating, threatening, or even prayer. It didn't work. She knew of at least one case of a whole congregation praying together in their church, getting jumped by all their doppelgangers at once. According to rumors, which were of course in doubt, they had locked themselves in the church, but the monsters had gotten them anyway. People were discussing how and why right now, and since it looked like the world was ending, Isabella was joining in as well. Her current favorite theory was rather simple. One of the people inside the church had been a doppelganger already. It was known that those things could work together with each other. So if they had let one of the monsters inside, it might have just opened the door for all the others. She shivered at the thought, then watched new comments pop up under the latest article. We are all going to die. Those words ending the post were what really made her shiver. Another knock on the door, and Isabella rolled her eyes. She knew who was out there. Someone who looked just like her. Luckily for her, this apartment had reinforced doors. There was no way to get through the entrance without heavy machinery or a key, and that monster out there had neither. At least for now. It was still knocking from time to time, trying to get her attention. She scoffed and then looked back at the screen. Someone would have to come up with an idea sooner or later, right? How many people had already died? It was impossible to know. For now, the only way to completely erase a doppelganger, and that permanently, was to kill the original before the monster could get to it. Which wasn't a great solution. Between the commenters asking around if anyone had heard about their loved ones, and others trying to profit off the end of the world, a handful of people seemed still willing to fight on. Someone would come up with a solution, they said over and over again, only to get mercilessly mocked for their hope. Maybe humanity really needed to die out, Isabella thought again, heard another knock, and gave off a sigh. She was lucky. Other people had loved ones to care about, and she didn't even want to think about what that would be like. Having your own children begging outside the door to be let in. A shiver ran through her at the thought. All she had was that damned other Isabella knocking on her door. She just had to keep the entrance to her apartment shut and hope that it would blow over on its own, or someone would come up with a solution. Which hopefully should happen in a couple of days. Otherwise, she would go hungry soon. Isabella grumbled, then stood up from the couch and left her laptop on the small table. She was walking through her home, aimlessly at first, then a bit quicker as she got to the pantry. Rice, beans, and at least a few cans of food. Her fridge wasn't too bad either. Yeah. As long as the water didn't get turned off, she'd be able to wait this whole thing out. A sudden thought hit her, and Isabella ran to the bathroom, closed the drain of the tub, and then turned on the water. Now, even if someone shut off the main valve, she wouldn't die of thirst. She smiled at herself, heard the knock on the front door, and then shook her head again. Her own doppelganger seemed different from those she had heard about in other posts. Some were apparently ultra-aggressive, shouting, screaming, and threatening people. But hers? No. All the other Isabella did was knock politely and wait. She probably didn't need water or food, and if she were to believe some commenters, this thing outside shared at least a big part of her memories. Maybe she should talk to her? At least once. It wasn't like the doppelganger would suddenly appear inside her apartment if she did. And maybe she could find out some stuff from the conversation. Like what their end goal was here. She listened to the sound of water filling the tub for a few more minutes, then turned off the faucet and walked back out into the living room. What would life be like after the disaster? If someone managed to make all the monsters disappear, how many had died already? What would happen to her job, to the country, to the world? Were they really everywhere? Well, Isabella had seen videos from around the world of people running away from what ostensibly looked like themselves. Some people had started taking selfies with their doppelgangers, only separated by a window or glass door. She wouldn't have dared do something like that. What if they broke the pane and entered? Once your home was broken into, you were pretty much dead. She had read enough stories about that to know how lucky she was, living on the 4th floor, with a reinforced door being the only access point to her apartment. The other Isabella knocked again, and she pulled out her phone while sinking down on the sofa. 17 missed calls, all gone to voicemail. A plethora of messages. She'd ignored them all, thinking it was for her own safety. But now doubts crept into her mind. What if someone had tried to reach her for a real emergency? No, she couldn't trust anyone anymore. Instead of looking at the messages, Isabella chose the app for the doorbell camera. The video was nice and clear, and for the first time she could see the one standing outside her apartment. It really was her. The same figure, the same hair, the same expression on her face, even the same clothing. She breathed in sharply, then stood up again and walked with her phone in hand toward the bedroom. Some part of her didn't want to look at the figure standing there while she herself was in view of the door. It felt like she was courting danger that way. Isabella walked to her bed, sat down, and continued looking at her own doppelganger. She didn't seem stressed or anxious at all. With a slight smile on her lips, the woman extended a hand and knocked on the door again. Isabella heard it from her phone and in real life at almost the same time. Should she talk to her? What could she even say? Her heart was beating a bit faster and she felt her mouth going dry. The woman out there was standing still again, waiting. Isabella shook her head, then pressed the microphone icon on her screen and watched it turn green. You know, you can stop knocking. I know you're there, but there's no way in hell I'm going to let you in. She noticed a sharp tone in her voice and hoped that the doppelganger could hear it too. If she really was like a copy of her, she definitely would. Isabella could see the woman turn her head down and look right at the camera. Finally, a voice came out of the phone in her hand. It was her own, only slightly distorted by the speakers. I've been waiting here for hours, and I was wondering what took you so long. Isabella bristled as she heard the voice. Did she really sound like that? That arrogant? She shook her head, then looked at the screen again. Her doppelganger was still staring right back through the camera. What do you want? You know I won't open the door for you, right? A smile played on the monster's lips. Do I know that? She asked, almost amused. Or do you just like to think that? Because I know you, and you don't work so well under pressure. Especially constant stress. I'm pretty sure sooner or later you'll open the store. Either willingly or to try and escape. Your car's tires got slashed already, by the way. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment. She couldn't outright deny the words. This thing knew her well. Biting her lip, Isabella drew in a quick breath. Who says I haven't run off already? You know I can access this doorbell camera via any connection. A short, cruel laugh reached her ears, and she could see the woman shaking her hand while smiling brightly. You're in there. I can hear you. I can even feel you. No matter where you run to, I will always be right behind you. There was a cold glimmer in the eyes looking into the camera, and Isabella couldn't help but tremble under the gaze. But you can't come in here. That door would take you years to break down. The smile on the other woman's face vanished as she looked at her with this strangely numb expression. You're right. I can't come for you right now, but there are a few things you haven't thought through. The door might be safe, but what about your windows? Now it was the real Isabella's turn to scoff. She shook her head even though she knew the other person wouldn't be able to see her. We're on the 4th floor, and I know how bad I am with heights and climbing. There's no way you're going to scale up the facade of this building without falling down and breaking your neck. The doppelganger smiled, then shrugged her shoulders. Maybe. Maybe not. Then again, there are a few other things I could do. Isabella thought she could see a shadow on the woman's face as the smile turned into a smirk. Did you not see the messages you got? Mark tried to reach you a few hours ago. I would guess around 40 minutes before I got here. Right? Isabella furrowed her brow. The thing was talking about her friend. You know he was aware of his clone as well, right? He was very, very scared and cautious. But when he saw you, well, me, standing in front of his door, pleading to be let in. Oh, you should have been there. Isabella swallowed hard but kept her mouth shut. I screamed that the thing was right behind me and that I needed help. He was almost crying. But in the end, He opened his door. So I guess it's your fault he died, don't you think? Isabella didn't answer. No, it wasn't her fault. Mark had done that to himself. The other Isabella was still grinning. His clone was very, very thankful, by the way. Sadly, I know the same trick wouldn't work on you. You're more of a coward, right? Still, she couldn't answer. Her throat felt closed up. Was Mark really dead? Or was that just one of the doppelganger's tricks? Do you want to see something cool? The other Isabella was still grinning from ear to ear, then turned away from the camera and pulled an object out of her pocket. She watched as her clone worked in secret, then suddenly felt her phone vibrate in her hands. A text message by Mark. Please, help me, Izzy. I'm in so much pain. Just open the door and let her in. Isabella frowned, then heard the laughter of the monster coming through the door and the speaker. I'm just playing with you, the voice said, and as she switched back to the camera feed, she could see her own face grinning while holding up a phone. Mark's phone, to be exact. I've been texting all of his friends and family, telling them to open their doors or simply scaring them. It's fun, right? Isabella felt sick as she watched the woman's smile turn even wider. I can forward you their responses. They are hilarious. Go fuck yourself, Isabella answered finally, shaking her head. The monster didn't even react to her words. You know, you can stop this anytime you like. Just open the door and I promise I'll drop the phone and stop messing with his family. All I need from you is one simple, small sacrifice. Isabella's finger hovered over the X that would close the connection. She didn't want to hear that damned voice or think about it anymore. This thing was cruel. Talking to it had been a mistake. Don't worry. I know you won't accept my deal. I'm just doing it to... She didn't get further since Isabella closed the app of her doorbell camera and dropped the phone onto the bed next to her. Talking to her had been a bad idea. She felt like shit now. What else could this monster have done? Someone knocked on the door again, and Isabella jerked back. She thought she could hear her giggling out there. The phone next to her bed vibrated, and only reluctantly did she glance at the screen. A message had come through from Mark's phone. Come on, don't be like that. Let's talk some more. A tremor ran through her body as she read those words. Isabella jumped up from the bed and started pacing around her room. What had she thought would happen? That this thing would be friendly, civilized, and understanding? It, and maybe billions like it, had suddenly appeared and were in the process of eradicating all the people on this planet. She was almost tearing out strands of her hair as she shook her head. Well, she hadn't imagined that those things would be this cruel and sadistic. Some people online had warned others not to interact with their doppelgangers. But hardly anyone had claimed that theirs were this fucked up. Or was hers just worse than the rest? Why? What was the point? She felt sick and tired, yet didn't dare fall asleep. What if this woman could come in here after all? If there were a way, she would have done so already. Right? Isabella wasn't 100% convinced. Maybe the monster wanted to torture her first. It seemed almost too happy while messing with her head. Isabella stopped her feet right next to the open door of her bedroom, then put her forehead against the frame and closed her eyes. The cold surface cooled down her head and thoughts. She was developing a fever. A curse came out of her mouth. Medication. That's what she was missing in here. She didn't even have painkillers anymore. Was that part of this monster's grand plan? Someone knocked on the door, and Isabella jerked back. She thought she finally understood why that doppelganger was doing it like this. The constant knocking. She was putting more and more pressure on her. In all likelihood, she would do so throughout the night, making sure that Isabella wouldn't get any sleep. She groaned and shook her head. If she put in earplugs, she wouldn't hear the knocking anymore. But what if that was the real plan of the thing? Maybe she would break down the door then. Or was there some other way? What about her neighbors? Were they still alive? If their apartment were open, her doppelganger might try to climb over from their window to hers. Isabella shivered at the thought. She could already see it in her mind's eye. A figure with her face hanging from the window frame, trying to get in. Her stomach cramped up, and she had to turn away and shake her head to get rid of the image. No, that thing wouldn't do something like that. It would fall and hurt itself. A cold chill crawled up her spine. From what she knew about those monsters, even if it broke its neck, after a few seconds it would simply stand up again and could try once more. Sooner or later, it would get in here. Isabella's legs started to shake. What was the point in holding the door shut if it was inevitable in the end? Yeah, some people online were claiming that they had defeated their doppelgangers, but she didn't believe that for a second. Either they were lying for attention, or the posts had been made by the monsters themselves, trying to get people to drop their guard. Either way, she wouldn't try it out. Isabella heard a knock again and felt her stomach lurch. She was still out there, the other one, waiting for her to make a mistake. She knew her far too well and would continue poking at her insecurities. No, she just needed to stay away from that door and keep herself occupied to stop the spiral she found herself on. Isabella straightened her back, took a deep breath, then walked into the living room where her laptop stood. She needed to calm down for once. Then she could think about other plans. Doing anything right now felt dangerous, and she knew herself well enough to know that her own hasty decisions had fucked her over countless times already. Right as she sat down, the next knock echoed across the apartment. This time, Isabella only sighed and rolled her eyes. The thing out there was getting predictable. She clicked on a link to a short video and could see people in a street in Spain running for their lives. It reminded her of that dumb Running with the Bulls festival, where these animals were driven through small cobbled roads, slipping and sliding while the mob around them brayed. She had hated seeing those videos before, but this one was markedly different. The people on her screen weren't cheering, but running in almost absolute silence. Others were behind them, people who looked like them. The doppelgangers. Isabella felt a cold chill as she watched. One of the guys slipped and fell, and no one around him tried to help him. His own personal pursuer, looking just like him, was upon him in less than 5 seconds. He didn't even get the chance to get up again, but was grabbed before both his feet touched the ground once more. She could see him struggling, heard his scream out of the speaker of her laptop, and watched in horror as the doppelganger pulled him off the street and into one of the dark alleys. Isabella's heart started beating faster. Never before had any video she knew of captured what the doppelgangers were doing with their victims once they caught them. It was like looking at her own future. This voice inside her head whispered, and Isabella felt sick for a moment. No, this wouldn't happen to her, she protested in her mind. And the more she knew about how those things operated, the better she could be prepared. Her fingernails were digging into the couch as she watched a figure, now no longer screaming, getting dragged deeper and deeper into the alley. The one with the camera was still filming those two, and now ignored the rest of the group. Finally, the doppelganger stopped dragging the man, and Isabella let out a relieved sigh as she saw that they were still in view of the camera, and the one filming was zooming in on the action. She could see the doppelganger grabbing the man now by his shoulders and pushing him hard against the wall before sinking down with him. He was holding him in place as he brought his own face to eye level with his victim. Isabella felt her heart beating faster as she watched them, staring at each other. What was he going to do? What did those things want? She felt her nails digging even harder into the couch. The doppelganger opened his mouth, and suddenly, with a loud thud, the power in her apartment went out. Isabella almost screamed, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. The video, it had suddenly stopped as well. Her laptop had no Wi-Fi connection anymore. She grabbed it and picked it up, but the video stayed frozen. Two men looking like twins, staring at each other on the screen. Isabella screamed as her head shot around. No! She was shaking the computer, hoping against hope that the video would start playing again. But all she did was tire out her arms. Why had the power gone out? Isabella listened closely for a moment, put down the laptop, then rushed to the door. There hadn't been a knock in some time now. She pressed herself against the entrance and looked out through the peephole. The hallway in front of her apartment was empty. Her doppelganger was gone. Isabella didn't feel any relief. This monster was probably downstairs, messing with the breaker or something like that. A cold chill gripped her at the thought. And suddenly, in the silence, she heard her phone vibrating on the bed. Isabella turned around and ran to her room. Her phone was lying there, on its screen on the mattress. She picked it up, turned it around, and saw the text. Knock, knock. Just kidding. We spend too much time on our electronics, don't you think? If you're feeling bored, you can come out and play. The winky face emoji at the end of the message almost made her scream. Isabella couldn't hold it in any longer. She typed back a message. Turn the power back on. Otherwise, I won't be able to talk to you anymore. The message was read. Then the 3 dots appeared, showing that her doppelganger was already typing a response. You should worry about something else first, don't you think? Isabella looked up and at the door. No, the knocking hadn't returned, but the apartment now felt completely silent. The water heater wasn't running anymore. Neither was the fridge. Isabella cursed, put the phone in her pocket, then ran to the kitchen. She opened the appliance, but there was no light greeting her this time. Shit, all her food in there would spoil. Isabella closed the door and took a step back. She couldn't cook either without electricity, and at night she would be sitting around here in complete darkness. No. Rolling around, she started pulling open the drawers, then ran to the bathroom. She still had 6 candles in here, so she would be able to have at least a bit of light during the dark hours. Isabella brought everything she could find to the table, then looked out of the window. It was afternoon already. Would it get cold? She didn't have heating in here anymore either. Cursing, she brought her hands down on the table and bit her lip. This was bad, her instincts told her. Whatever her doppelganger was planning right now, she wouldn't be able to do much about it. All her attention was now on getting ready for the night. A sudden knock pulled her out of her thoughts, and Isabella felt her heart racing at the sound. The monster had returned. She dropped what she held in her hands and quietly walked to the door. Another knock. This thing out there wanted her attention. She pulled out the phone. Still, a ton of unread messages, but nothing too recent. It hadn't tried reaching her that way. Strange, Isabella thought, and felt herself hesitating as she stopped at the door. Did it think she would simply open it? No. It wasn't that dumb. She looked through the peephole and caught a glimpse of the woman standing out there, now smiling from ear to ear. This was a bad sign, Isabella thought. She watched on as the woman, still smiling, waved at her, then pulled something out from behind her back. For a moment, she thought it was a gun, then calmed herself down immediately. This door was bulletproof. The landlord had told her as much, and she knew how thick the metal really was. If the doppelganger tried to shoot her through the door, this thing would find itself in a lot of pain from the ricochet. No, that wasn't what was happening. This thing didn't want to kill her. Otherwise, it would have already set the whole apartment complex on fire. The monster was still waving at her with one hand, then suddenly brought the other forward and hit the door right at the peephole. Isabella jerked back, cursed, and then looked again. It was dark now. The glass lens inside the door was covered by something outside. Isabella heard a laugh coming through the entrance as she stood there, completely perplexed. Was that her big play? Sticking something to her peephole? She just shook her head. It wasn't like she was going to need to see her out there to not open the door. Instead of worrying about it or acting out, she just shrugged her shoulders, then walked back to the table where the candles were still waiting. She sorted them by the length of time they would still burn, then made herself a cold dinner from things in her fridge that would spoil first. If this monster wanted to wait her out, it would need to stay outside her door for a long time, Isabella thought. Living like this wasn't great, but at least she was safe in here, and would be for weeks. A cold chill ran through her as she thought about that. Would it go on that long? No way, right? Those things would disappear again. She wanted to go back to her laptop and look up more videos, then remembered that she didn't have Wi-Fi anymore. Right now, that computer is as useless as a brick. No, she could still charge her phone with it, and it had access to the internet. Isabella got a cable and connected the two devices, then watched her phone getting charged while the battery of the laptop started to run low. It would give her a few more hours, maybe a whole day if she used it sparingly. She could feel her heart beating faster as a smile appeared on her lips, then suddenly vanished. There was a noise reaching her ears. Not a knock as before, but something else. Now, if she thought about it, she hadn't heard that thing hammering on her door this past hour. The apartment was silent, so it couldn't come from inside. Isabella looked around, then listened again. Sheet metal was aching. She could hear it close by. From outside. Her eyes shot toward the window in the kitchen. A shadow was falling across it in the weak light of the evening sun, and Isabella's heart almost stopped. She could see a hand reaching out to the frame, then the windowsill, and heard the metal aching again. Oh, God. Her throat closed up as she watched. Her legs started shaking. It was coming. Should she fight or run? Isabella felt cold as she saw a hand touching the glass, then a palm pressed against the outside of the window. No, this was her chance, she thought. She could run and leave while a doppelganger was climbing over to her window. Her car was in front of the apartment complex. She pulled her phone from the charger, grabbed the kitchen knife, then ran to the door. Automatically, she glanced at the peephole but saw nothing but darkness. Isabella shook her head, unlocked the door, opened it, and froze. "Hi, Izzy," the woman standing there said. She had the same face as her and was exactly the same height, but the hate in her eyes was so completely different from her own. Isabella shook her head as she staggered back, and the woman quickly put her foot out in between the door and frame. No, this wasn't possible. She had heard it and seen the hand. Isabella looked behind her as she stumbled backwards. There was still a hand on the outside of the glass, but the face that now stared into her apartment through it was one she hadn't seen before. "One of your neighbors. I helped him. He helps me. You should have done more to get to know them, by the way." The cheer in the voice almost made her sick. Isabella stopped on her feet and looked at the woman coming closer and closer, now already standing in her apartment, smiling. Anger overtook her. How could she have been this dumb? The other Isabella had known exactly what she would do. That grin on the doppelganger's face was mocking her. She gripped the hilt of the kitchen knife and thrust it forward. The blade struck the woman right in the chest, but her smile didn't waver. Instead, her hand came forward and gripped Isabella by the wrist. "Got you," the monster whispered as blood stained her blouse. Isabella screamed, kicked at the doppelganger, pulled back and freed her wrist. She was stumbling, crying, turning around and running through her apartment. Behind her, the kitchen knife hit the floor. She couldn't think straight anymore. Her feet carried her through the apartment. There was only one door she could look in here. The bathroom. Isabella ran to it, threw the door shut behind her, locked it, and jumped back and hit the cold tile wall. Her knees buckled as she sank down. It was getting dark in here. Cold sweat was running down her back. Footsteps were coming closer. They were slow and measured. The doppelganger wouldn't die so easily. Isabella felt tears running down her face. She could do nothing but stare at the flimsy door. Why? That was the question now filling her mind. Why had that happened? Why had she opened her apartment? Why? A cold, cruel laugh reached her ears. "This is ridiculous," the woman's voice said as the footsteps stopped right in front of the door. Isabella shook her head. Could she call someone? Anyone? The police? No, she didn't. She couldn't. Something touched a cheap lock on the other side of the door and turned it from the outside. Isabella heard the mechanism inside clicking. With a groan, the entrance opened. Eyes were staring down at her. They looked like hers, but there was no mercy in them. "Let's end this quickly," the cold voice promised. Isabella couldn't even get back up to her feet before two hands reached out and grabbed her face. The woman was staring at her like in the video. Isabella wanted to scream as the monster forced her to look into her eyes. A low chuckle filled her ears before everything turned black.